Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. And this one, I'm going over the zero RB draft strategy, and especially how we're going to look at that in terms of how we want to approach our drafts in 2024. The zero RB draft strategy is certainly one that's gained a lot of popularity over the years. I remember hearing about it, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and really thinking it was a really novel, interesting idea. And it is something that I sort of personally fell in love with and sort of really liked to try and do if it really broke right for me over a lot of my drafts. But I think it's going to be really interesting in terms of how we want to approach that this year with just how slanted the ADPs have gotten. Obviously, if we look back on last season, take out Christian McCaffrey, nearly all of the top tier running backs people drafted ended up busting for a lot of people. So I think that the pendulum has clearly swung. We've also seen an NFL that's a lot more pass happy, a lot more committee backfields. There aren't any more true workhorse running backs, or at least they're very few and far between. So I think people in general are really looking to shift themselves more towards an approach where they really build their fantasy rosters around a strong wide receiver core, and that's making the zero RB draft strategy a lot more popular. So I just wanted to do a bit of a deep dive on that this season, see how you could necessarily go about doing that, and in general whether or not I think it's going to be a good idea this year. So yeah, fun making this video. Let me know what you guys think at the end here. Let me know if it's something you guys will be trying out this year, and let me know what you guys think. So yeah, let's get into the start here. So we'll start things off here with just like a quick explanation in terms of what is zero RB. The idea behind the zero running back draft strategy is that you're focusing on building out a really dominant wide receiver room, often adding an elite quarterback or elite tight end into the mix there as well, and then often not drafting a running back until round 5 or later. This means that you are likely to end up being one of, if not the last teams in your league to acquire that first running back on your roster, and it's effectively putting yourself in a position where you're going to have the strongest roster outside of your running back in your league, but you're going to have one of the weakest running back rooms in your league, if not the weakest. The idea behind that is that there are going to be a lot of running backs over the course of the entire season that are going to fluctuate in value quite a bit. Conceptually here, the idea is that starting running backs are likely to get hurt, and there are going to be much clearer jumps in terms of running back value for the guys behind them, and that opens up a lot of opportunity for there to be variety and randomness over the course of the season that can improve your roster, and that doesn't necessarily exist with the other positions. If a top tier wide receiver goes down, it doesn't necessarily mean that the guys behind him automatically fill into an elite role, as to where when you have these top tier running backs go down, if you've got like a very viable handcuff that's right behind him, that guy often takes on an entire 25 touch role in that offense and ends up being super fantasy viable for the weeks that he's starting. So that's where you're seeing the real upside from this approach. And really, the zero RB draft strategy does, in theory, elevate the ceiling of any roster you're building, but it also does leave you far more susceptible to volatility. You need to first off make sure that you're going to have that top tier wide receiver room. If you miss on any of those picks, it's going to be super difficult because then you're going to be weak in 2 areas. And on top of that, you do need to get a little bit lucky. You do need to land those running backs that end up being super viable, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do on every single season. So how do we effectively build a zero RB roster? The first thing I want to highlight here is that you should never go into a draft forcing yourself to take a specific approach. That's going to make it really impossible to take a value when it presents itself. For example, if you start a draft saying, all right, I'm going to build a zero RB team, and then the first 2 picks are CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill, you'd kind of be silly to pass up on Christian McCaffrey just so that you can go about building out that zero RB build. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't go into your draft forcing yourself into this role. It needs to be something that sort of falls to you. But if you do take a zero RB approach, one of the first things that I want to tell you guys is that you're likely going to start the season slower than a lot of the other teams in your league. This is because, like I said, a lot of the value to this approach comes from improving your running back room over the course of the season. The idea here is that you're starting the season with a weaker running back room, and then you're going to find guys on waivers, whether those be handcuffs for running backs that get hurt, guys that step into a role we weren't expecting. You're trying to find those guys that are going to improve your team over the course of the season, so you've got to understand that week 1 your team is obviously not going to be at full strength. Um, but the obvious advantage here is that if you do hit on those guys, the rest of your team's already stacked at the start of the season. Then you end up with some really dominant waiver wire running backs. You're in a really good spot. An easy example here would be last season. If you took the zero RB draft approach and grabbed Raheem Mostert and Kyren Williams at the end of your draft, I bet you won fantasy league because you were stacked everywhere else, and you ended up with 2 top 10 running backs on top of that. So that's how this draft strategy really can work out. But you've obviously got to understand that you do need to hit on those guys. You do need to make sure you're active all season. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're in a format that's going to cater to it as well. You want to be in a 3 wide receiver league, probably a 3 wide receiver plus a flex league, if not larger. You want there to at least be some form of PPR, whether that be half or full, just so that the value of running backs is a little bit nerfed relative to wide receivers. But if those things do apply, you really can go about building a good roster this way. So let's take a look at the options here for 2024, specifically here the first two rounds. So if you've got the first pick in your draft, I think you should honestly just be taking Christian McCaffrey. You're kind of forcing things if you look anywhere else. I know it's fun to look at the zero RB build. I know we saw a lot of running backs get hurt last season and a lot of them bust out, and obviously that could happen to Christian McCaffrey here, but it's just as likely that we see CeeDee Lamb get hurt or Tyreek Hill get hurt or like any player can get hurt here. So it just makes a lot of sense. Don't force things here. Take the best player available, and that's going to be Christian McCaffrey. However, if you do have picks 2 through 6, at least by ADP, we are seeing 5 wide receivers go off the board in the next 5 picks. Those being Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think you can actually make the zero RB strategy sort of work if you've got one of those picks. You're going to be able to pair one of those top 5 wide receivers with someone else like Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, Nico Collins, Mike Evans. There are a lot of really good wide receivers available at the back half of round 2 that you could pair one of those top tier wide receivers with another one of those really great wide receivers in round 2, and you're off to a really great start in terms of building your wide receiver room. And for that reason alone, I think it's going to make the zero RB draft strategy something that's going to be really popular this season. I'll talk about that more later, but we're seeing some very significantly lower ADPs for some of these top tier running backs. Normally in the first round, you'll see 8 to 9 running backs go, and we're not seeing the RB10 go off the board until pick 45 right now. So wide receivers are absolutely going way earlier than they have in years past, and it's making some ADP decisions here really interesting. After that, though, if you've got picks 7 to 8 just based off of ADP, that's where Bijan and Breece Hall go. I wouldn't reach below there to take a guy like Puka Nacua or AJ Brown. I would certainly be taking those running backs there. However, if one of those top 5 wide receivers is available, you could make the decision to take one of them. I would still probably take Bijan or Breece over most of those guys personally. If I were going to be ranking my sort of overall ADP based off of my drafting, I would take Bijan and Breece over any of the wide receivers not named Tyreek or CeeDee. But I do think that you could potentially take one of those guys there if they do slip to you at pick 7 or 8. And then in picks 9 through 12, you could definitely go about building a really strong wide receiver duo to start. Notice I'm only highlighting wide receiver duos early on because there aren't any quarterbacks or tight ends going early in rounds 1 or 2 that can make it really an option. If you're going zero RB, you're taking 2 wide receivers in each of the first 2 rounds. And if you got picks 9 through 12, you can definitely do this without reaching to be something like taking AJ Brown and then Drake London, maybe Marvin Harrison and Puka Nacua, something like that. And it's obviously a really good start, but in general, I sort of feel like you're setting yourself up for failure doing that because all of the teams that got a top 5 wide receiver, someone who got CeeDee Lamb then is pairing him with Jalen Waddle or Devontae Adams, that's just a way better duo than what you're getting if you're going Puka Nacua and Drake London, for example. So I just feel like you're putting yourself in a bad spot because you've got a worse wide receiver duo than someone else who picked earlier than you, and then they've got a better 3rd round pick as well. So I don't think it's a great strategy late in the draft. I know it's tough to really find yourself in a spot where you're picking that late, so oftentimes your options are limited, but I do find that if I'm in picks 9 through 12, I like targeting someone like Jahmyr Gibbs, giving myself that advantage so that I can get a top tier wide receiver and a running back, but that's certainly a possibility if you want to go the zero RB route there. So after those first 2 rounds, in picks 3 to 4, if you do want to go about building a zero RB roster, I do highly recommend targeting a high-end quarterback or a tight end in the first 4 rounds. This is because in general, we're only starting 3 or 4 wide receivers on our rosters. If you've got a league that's got 3 wide receivers and 2 flex spots, you could probably go about taking 4 wide receivers to start, but the fact of the matter is you're likely going to start the season with one of the weakest running back rooms in your league, so you want to make sure that you have advantages everywhere else in your roster, and if you can leave the first 4 rounds with an elite wide receiver trio and then maybe even the quarterback 1 or the tight end 1, that is something to get excited about and something that's really going to set you up for success if you can manage to hit on some running backs later on. So I do recommend doing that. Like I said, you can target just going 4 wide receivers to start if you're in a league that starts 4 or 5 wide receivers every single week, but it's going to be really tough because you're not going to have a quarterback because the teams are going to have top tier quarterbacks or tight ends and a running back at that point. So your wide receivers are going to have to carry you if you go with that approach. So then let's look at what we should do after round 4. So there are sort of 2 approaches here. On one hand, you obviously want to get yourself some stability at the running back position. Like I said, early on in the season, you're likely not to have the best running back room in your league, so you don't want to put yourself in a spot where you're eating zeros. Examples of players like this, these are guys that are going a lot later, but like Jerome Ford is likely to have a role at the start of the season. Chuba Hubbard is likely to have a role at the start of the season. These are 2 guys that are going for absolutely nothing. They're being drafted at the very end of drafts, and you could potentially just pick them up there, play them for the first month of the season, and then evaluate your running back room as you go there. But on the other hand here, you really do want to be shooting for upside here. if you can hit on a stud, if you can get yourself a top 5 running back or a top 10 running back at these spots, you're giving yourself a really great shot at winning your league because you've already got an elite core everywhere else. So the beautiful part about this season is that there are a lot of running backs going in round 5 or later that I actually think are probably in line to finish as at least borderline running back ones. Some examples here are Josh Jacobs, James Cook, Rashad White, and Alvin Kamara all going in round 5 or later. That is insane. Normally we would see the kind of running backs like that going in round 3 or 2 even. So it's definitely crazy to see how far these ADPs have gotten pushed down. And there are even more running backs that I could talk about there, but the key takeaway for me there is that you can actually build a pretty good running back room this season by waiting until round 5. You could take Josh Jacobs, who's the RB12 by ADP. He's going 2 picks after Keenan Allen, who's the wide receiver 33 by ADP. So just crazy to see that we've got 33 wide receivers off the board before the last RB1 gets drafted. That seems really silly to me. If you just think about trade values during the course of a season, I think anybody in their right mind will happily trade their wide receiver 3 for a running back 1. It just seems silly. We've definitely sort of escalated that, but as long as that's going to be there, I think there's a lot of value in taking these running backs in the middle rounds. So there is something to be said for at least leaving yourself the opportunity to take these running backs here. Don't go running back in the first 3 rounds because there's going to be a lot of great values at the position later on, and it's going to make it hard for you to capitalize on those later. So you definitely want to leave yourself the opportunity of taking at least one running back in the middle rounds. The other thing I'll highlight too is that you definitely want to target handcuffs if you go with this approach. Like I said, Kyren Williams ended up being awesome last season because he was a handcuff to Cam Akers, who obviously flamed out in Los Angeles. Then we got to see Kyren Williams be a full-time player. Some examples of that this season. We can start with the Rams. Blake Corum's got a legitimate shot to be fantasy relevant all season. Tyler Algier, if something were to happen to Bijan, he would be awesome. Zach Charbonnet, if something happened to Kenneth Walker, he would be awesome. Elijah Mitchell, he would be awesome in the event of a Christian McCaffrey injury. There's plenty of other examples. Marshawn Lloyd behind Josh Jacobs, Kendre Miller behind Alvin Kamara, lots of high-end handcuff guys that you could take a look at, and you just want to look at those guys and see which guys have guaranteed roles if the starter gets hurt, and then you want to stash those guys for as long as you can, because if you have them and the guy ahead of them gets hurt, your team's going to get insanely better just because of an injury happening. So definitely a key thing to do there if you're going 0 RB is stash some handcuffs. So overall, how do I feel about the 0 RB approach this season? This is honestly one of the hardest years for me to evaluate this strategy. Every single year so far, I've done like an evaluation of this strategy. I'll do an evaluation later on the robust running back strategy and all sorts of like these general builds, the hero RB strategy and all that. And this is actually one of the tougher years for me to evaluate it because it feels like the market has shifted so far in favor of the wide receivers that I'm sort of in favor of taking running backs early. Like I said, getting Jahmyr Gibbs at the end of round 1, that seems like a steal. You can get Derrick Henry at the end of round 3, Travis Etienne at the end of round 3. A lot of really good running backs are going a lot later than they used to, and it just feels bad passing up that value as often as it seems like we're having to do. But on the flip side, we're seeing a lot of situations here where if you do go running back early, all the wide receivers are gone by the time you get to the middle rounds. So you definitely want to be capitalizing on and making sure you get some of the wide receivers early because they are going to dry up pretty quickly in drafts this season. And that being said, I do think it's gone a little bit too far. For example, is Josh Jacobs. I just keep using him as the example because the RB12 by ADP. He's currently being drafted after Hollywood Brown. That is just silly. I don't know what people are thinking there. So there is obviously a bit of a too large of a pendulum swing here. On top of that, I do also prefer to take guys like Bijan or Brees over some of the wide receivers that are going in round 1. So I think it's a little bit too top heavy with the wide receivers. But on the flip side too, I also think that both the quarterback and the tight end positions this season, they're a lot deeper than they have been historically. I think both those positions can go 8 or 9 deep in terms of guys that have like legitimate shot to be difference makers for you this season. So taking a high-end quarterback early on or a high-end tight end early on this season doesn't feel like the guaranteed advantage that it normally is, and that sort of makes me a little bit less optimistic about taking 0 running backs that early because the idea is that you're going to gain an advantage at other positions, and I don't know that you're really doing that at the running back or the tight end or quarterback positions this season. But all that being said, you can still build a really solid running back room while waiting on the running back position, especially if you wait till like round 5. I think it's kind of a sweet spot. I really do want to be taking running backs in round 5 right now, so I think that if the value presents itself, you can probably be in a 3 wide receiver league with a half or a full point PPR. And I do think 0 RB can work this season. You're going to want to find yourself in a spot where it's a value being presented to you. You should never force this into your roster build. But I do think that you really will get find yourself in a position where just because of how wide receiver heavy everybody is in their drafts, even going 0 RB, I don't know how much better your wide receiver room is going to be than some of these people. Everyone, it seems like, is taking 2 wide receivers in the first 2 rounds, so maybe you've got a better wide receiver 3 than someone else, but that means they've got a much better RB1, so I don't know how much that value that really presents itself. I think if I were to really be like giving out advice, I would say you should probably be taking 2 running backs in each of the first 5 rounds. Find one of the better values in each of the first 3. Someone like Derrick Henry at the end of round 3. Maybe Saquon Barkley slips to the end of round 2. Something like that. I think I want to be targeting one running back slightly earlier on and then getting a valuable running back in round 5. But if the value all presents itself, I think the 0 RB strat could work this season. It's just that I think it's going to be really popular, and it's not going to be the zag while everybody's zigging that it's always been historically. And on top of that, because of how like shifted down in ADPs the running backs are this season, I think building out a true RB0 team this season would likely, you'd have to sort of wait until like round 7 to really draft your first running back, because that's sort of what a 0 RB build would look like historically with the kind of running backs that you're getting as your RB1. And doing that just seems a little bit silly to me with all the values in rounds 5 and 6 the running back positions. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. I do think you can do the 0 RB build this season waiting until round 5 because there are a lot of values available. But as always, you don't want to force it. You want to make sure that you're getting value, and you want to make sure that you're in a league format that actually justifies the strategy. So that'll do it for the 0 RB draft strategy recap. Hopefully that was useful. I feel like the more I looked into it and everything, the less confident I was in terms of which side I wanted to be on there. So I think that it's sort of just up to you guys this season for the 0 RB draft strategy. Hopefully I laid it out nicely enough for you guys that you guys can help sort of make that decision for yourselves. But I don't think I'll be doing it a lot this season. I do think that there's going to be too much value with the running backs in the middle rounds, guys in rounds 3 that I really like. I like Kyren Williams going in round 3. Josh Jacobs going in round 5 is way too appealing, along with Rachaad White. You've got Saquon at the end of round 2. A lot of values across the board that I think it'll be too hard for me to pass up, especially with just some of the wide receivers that you're taking instead of them. So I don't necessarily think that I'll be going 0 RB this season, but I do think it's going to be a really popular draft strategy this season. So it is going to be something that we definitely want to be talking about. Up next, I'm going to go over some of my favorite deep league sleepers. I'm going to look at players being drafted outside of the top 150 that I think have legitimate shots at being, high-end contributors for you guys that could be league winners, and guys that not necessarily everybody in your draft is going to have heard of. So it's always fun pulling names out of a hat that people in your draft haven't heard of, and then you can feel like a genius when they hit, and if they don't hit, then nobody cares because they weren't supposed to anyway. So those are some of the more fun videos to make as well. We're going to keep making several videos every single week throughout the course of the rest of the offseason, making even more during the regular season. We'll be here all year long to help you guys win your league. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so that way you can keep getting all this free content. And if you made it this far in the video, please do give it a thumbs up as well. It really helps with the algorithm, helps know that I'm doing a good job, and I just really appreciate all you guys. So thanks for watching. Appreciate you all, and I'll catch you with the next one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.